You, Senator, helped to spearhead an effort with Senator Kaine on a bipartisan basis to prevent any president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO.
Yes.
Did you write that with Donald Trump in mind? Because he's the only president that I can recall who has ever threatened to withdraw from NATO.
I wrote it. I can't speak for Senator Kaine. I wrote it with the belief that it's an important alliance. If NATO didn't exist, we'd have to create it. It's one of our strategic strengths that we have in the world, because China doesn't have these alliances, for example, and neither do the Russians for that matter, or the Iranians for that matter. But I believe Congress needs to play a role in deciding whether we're going to remove ourselves from that. That said, I will tell you that despite what people may say is rhetoric, because I acknowledge that Donald Trump does not talk like a member of the Council of Foreign Relations on these issues, he actually increased troop levels in Poland, and I saw them. I was there when that happened.
He was trying to draw down from Germany and rotate into Poland. President Biden reversed that.
And so the point being is that I don't believe Donald Trump will remove us from NATO. I do think he is going to do, admittedly in an unorthodox way, what virtually every American president has done since the onset of NATO, and that is demand that some...
Okay, so that is 2023 Rubio, and in 2023 he was right. NATO had just expanded, Finland and Sweden joined, they're scared of Russia, the Ukrainian war probably felt fresh. So the European nations were thinking they need NATO without a doubt. They were the beggars. So Rubio standing up for NATO is actually him doing a favor for Europe.
And we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know.
Now, this is Marco Rubio in 2026, and please tell me if he's actually contradicting himself.
Let me ask you about NATO. You said that our NATO allies have been disappointing. Specifically, I know you're talking about Spain, Great Britain, France, even Italy now, and that after all of this is done, we will re-examine this relationship, and especially when it comes to, we pay 2/3 of the freight when it comes to NATO defense, and if it's just, quote, about us defending Europe, you said, at this point, how do we call that? And we can't have our landing rights in European nations, our allies, at a time when we need them. What good is that alliance? And is the NATO alliance at risk?
Sean, I've been one of the strongest defenders of NATO during my time as a United States Senator because I found great value in it. And it wasn't just about defending Europe. I said it also allowed us to have military bases in Europe that allowed us to project power into different parts of the world when our national security was threatened. If now we have reached a point where the NATO alliance means that we can't use those bases, that in fact, that we can no longer use those bases to defend America's interests, then NATO is a one-way street. Then NATO is simply about us having troops in Europe to defend Europe. But when we need their help, not their help, we're not asking them to conduct airstrikes. When we need them to allow us to use their military bases, their answer is no. Then why are we in NATO? You have to ask that question. Why do we have billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, over the years, trillions of dollars, and all of these American forces stationed in the region? If we can only use, in our time of need, we're not going to be allowed to use those bases. So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO and that alliance for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make, and he'll have to make it. We're going to finish the job here. As I said, we're very, very close to achieving our objectives on all of these things that I've outlined. But I do think, unfortunately, we are going to have to re-examine whether or not this alliance that has served this country well for a while is still serving that purpose, or is it now become a one-way street where America is simply in a position to defend Europe, but when we need the help of our allies, they're going to deny us basing rights and they're going to deny us overflight? I think these are very legitimate questions that we need to be asking, and this are going to have to be very carefully examined after this conflict is over.
NATO is us. NATO is America. So in 2026, when the Americans need it, it was put to the test, and it simply failed.
You voiced your displeasure with NATO in the past. Is there a danger to the U.S. not being the de facto of the leader of the alliance, and then other powers within the alliance then getting the decision making when it comes to wars and nuclear weapons?
No, it's not a danger. look, we went to NATO. I didn't ask very strongly. I just said, hey, if you want to help, great. No, we will not help. I said, that's all right. You don't want to help? Because I've always said NATO's a paper tiger. See, NATO's a paper tiger. Putin's not afraid of NATO. Putin's afraid of us, very afraid of us. And he's explained it to me a lot of times. I got to know him very well. I know him very well. NATO's a paper tiger. NATO is us. And when we needed them, we didn't need them, by the way. We didn't need them, obviously, because they haven't helped at all. Just the opposite. They've actually gone out of their way not to help. They didn't even want to give us landing strips. Think of it. And it's not just NATO. You know who else didn't help us? South Korea didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Australia didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Japan. We've got 50,000 soldiers in Japan.
Paper tiger. So Donald Trump has been saying this since 2016, and he's sort of been proven right. Now, I'm about to play Mark Rutte. He's the Secretary General of NATO. He's the top guy in NATO. He's also the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and he makes total sense to me. Have a listen.
Hey, but so when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him. And I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't. We can't. We need each other. And why do we need each other? I tell you. First of all, because also the US needs NATO. And the US is not only in NATO to prevent a mistake after the First World War, not to re-engage with Europe. And then again, the long arm of history reaching out to the US again in the Second World War, as Churchill famously said in his speech in 1941 in the US Congress. They are also in NATO because for the US to stay safe, and by the way, Arctic region is evidence here, they need a secure Arctic, they need a secure Euro-Atlantic, and they also need a secure Europe. So the US has every interest in NATO as much as Canada and the European NATO allies. But for Europe, if you really want to go it alone, and those of you who are planning for that, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. You will lose then, in that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. Good luck.
So that was Mark Rutte putting some senses into the European leaders, and you can see some of them are flinching as he spews all these facts on them. And he's absolutely right. European nations and the Western alliances, they absolutely depend on the nuclear umbrella of the US. So sometimes when the peacetime gets too long, they think they're invincible, but really, without the US support and without the US Defense Force and the presence of the US nuclear weapon, Iran, China, and Russia are just drooling over you. We gotta remember that. And so, look, people and politicians are allowed to change their minds when the facts change. And that's not weakness, that's not hypocrisy, that's intelligence, and that's quite frankly the job of a statesman. Marco Rubio defended NATO when NATO was worth defending, and I'm sure he still defends it on principle. And now that NATO has shown their true colors, he's saying what millions of Americans are thinking. He's calling it out. Why are we paying for this? Thank you for listening so far, and if this is the kind of breakdown you enjoy, please subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.